Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming back from lunch, and thank you for waiting the extra 10 minutes. Let me start the second panel of the conference, which is entitled Perspectives from the Islamic World. We have 4 distinguished panelists here who have arrived from different parts of the Islamic world. On my left, from Turkey, Dr. Talha Köse, professor at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul. From Indonesia, Dr. Dadi Dermadi, on my right, a senior lecturer at the Sharif Hiyadutala State Islamic University in Jakarta. And then Professor Masood Akhtar Hazarvi, who's originally from Pakistan, but is now director at the Al-Hira Educational and Cultural Center in Luton, the United Kingdom. And then we have, an addition, a distinguished guest, Dr. Afzal Chowdhury, who's chairman of the Search Peace Foundation in the UK, but originally from Pakistan. Now, before I introduce the first panelist, I'd like to do some housekeeping. First, if you could mute your phones. I have to do that too. I've done that. And then I have a request for our panelists. This panel is fairly short, just 1 hour, so I'd like to ask them to keep their interventions to 10, max 15 minutes. And now our first panelist, Dr. Talha Köse. I think you've read his bio in the little booklet. I'll just mention a few more things. He's a chair and associate professor of political science at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul. His academic expertise and research centers on conflict resolution and ethnic, sectarian, and religious conflicts and political violence in the Middle East. He has published widely, both in Turkish and in English, and prior to joining the university, he had worked at the CETA Foundation, which is a leading Turkish think tank, and he was a chair, the head of research of its Washington, D.C. branch. And he appears frequently on Turkish and international media and comments on foreign policy and regional security. His presentation will focus on the role of cultural identity and power in intercultural conflicts. And Dr. Köse, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Institute of International Relations and Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Czech Republic for bringing conflict resolution and mediation to policymakers and media's attention in such a turbulent time. Especially this is a difficult time for Western democracies as well as Muslim populations all over the world. This is at the same time a pessimistic time for cultural pluralism in many parts of the world. So values of coexistence, respect for universal human rights, or respect for the other are eroding under the influence of populist political actors and exclusionary social and economic practices in Western contexts. So bringing together some important experts and decision makers for discussing these fresh ideas for this challenging topic is very important. And I will also elaborate today on the challenges of OIC countries facing some problematic engagement with other international actors, as well as their domestic problems. So they have major social and political problems. Many of them are either experiencing violent conflicts, civil wars, or having deep political and economic problems. External interventions and legacy of past conflicts definitely have influence on their current situation. However, we cannot explain everything with those difficult legacies. Muslim societies historically have pluralistic legacy, but today many of them cannot deal with their internal diversity in an inclusive manner. Despite the history of discrimination and exclusion, Western societies managed to create inclusive political structure that brought political stability and prosperity to Western societies in the aftermath of World War II, and liberal international order brought some stability to the world. However, these democratic and inclusive governance system is eroding in the last couple of years. So I will try to reflect on some social and political approaches and practices to counter those challenges. I believe, coming from a conflict resolution perspective, the bottom-up approaches, grassroots level engagements are very important, and they are often avoided in policy circles. And I think the human capacity is very important in that matter. So conflicts all over the Muslim world are mostly triggered at elite levels, international levels, and leaders play a significant role in the formation and persistence of those conflicts. So I believe the grassroots levels are usually not mentioned, and the leaders usually resort to more dialectic discourses. They try to divide their communities to work on them and to manage. And there is a lack of dialogical spaces for countering those challenges, and especially there is a lack of civil society initiatives to deal those challenges within the Muslim world. So media, education, economic development, and dialogue procedures at various levels may be some effective tools. So rather than expecting the management of these resources, creating more dialogical space for engagement at lower levels, grassroots levels, may be more effective. So the broader challenges that the Muslims facing today are Islamophobia, radicalism, sectarianism, extremism of different sorts, as well as especially xenophobia in the Western context. So these, the discourses of the clash of civilizations after the 9/11 attacks have actually transformed the societies, not only in the Muslim world, but at the same time in the Western context. And Muslim migrants, people of different ethnic and racial backgrounds, are increasingly considered and perceived as culprits of the many difficulties, economic difficulties, political difficulties in Western context as well. So, and also there's an increasing concern for the people of different backgrounds. So the recent synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, US, which led to that of 11 innocent worshippers, reminds us the habits of anti-Semitism and all different sorts of supremacism. And these, the discourses of hate are usually very influential. They bring easy explanations to the political challenges, economic challenges of recent problems. However, they may have long-lasting influence in polarizing the people. On the other hand, what we experience in the Muslim world is problems in Myanmar, Central African Republic, China, and also the war-torn societies in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, and all these problems constitute at the same time anti-immigrant discourses and policies within the Muslim societies as well. So under this context, how can mediation help to address some of these dialectic discourses and discriminations? So these concepts such as identity, ethnicity, sect, tribe, civilization, religion, they are oftentimes addressed or mentioned with some negative connotations. I mean, these are rich cultural resources, rich cultural elements. However, in the last couple of years, maybe more than a decade, everything that's associated with these concepts are considered very negatively. That's also minority groups, immigrants were securitized. They were considered as security problems. So mediation and conflict resolution approaches offer alternative perspectives to the decision makers. So, and ideas and generated at peace and conflict studies area are, I think, very influential, and oftentimes they are just tried to be applied in the diplomatic levels, and usually they do not address the problems with regard to intercommunal coexistence and dialogue. So I would like to give some ideas from. So mediation and alternative dispute resolution approaches are usually human-centric and bottom-up approaches. So human security is at the center of the perspective, and without addressing underlying grievances and human needs, they assume that we cannot reach to stable societies. Secondly, empowering the local actors and working with them is more important in this perspective. So local experiences are very important resources, and it is often a useful tool to work from bottom up to deal with extremist discourses that are manipulated by some politicians and certain elites. And fixing the relations and addressing the underlying needs is very important. However, those methods, those concerns can only be achieved with the working with some other civilian actors as well. And also culture, norms, and symbols constitute the basis of different conflicting identities, and those differences needs to be respected. And also, there should be, all like the conflict processes, conflict resolution processes needs to be skillfully planned, and different steps need to be taken into account. So, as the space in the politics is increasingly becoming more dialectic and more controversial. So what is needed, I think, is to expand the domain of politics and increase the dialogical spaces. By dialogue is defined as a process of genuine interaction through which human beings listen to each other and deeply enough to be changed what they learn from these experiences. So it is not just about the talking, but trying to engage with the other in order to be changed, change the mindset. So I think these experiences are very important, and they can hardly be dealt at more political, diplomatic levels. So one reason behind, as mentioned before, the context is very dialectic, is that in diplomacy, in political affairs, usually the perspective is win-lose. So one who wins is considered as others' loss. So what I believe is that creating and expanding dialogical spaces in an approach that may enable constructive engagement by the members of the conflicting parties is very important, and this can be achieved at the grassroots level. I would like to give some examples for this. I mean, even in the conflicting societies, there is very limited resources for engaging among the youth, among the women, among the people from different backgrounds. There are often uninstitutionalized spaces, and people can hardly find a project to deal, to hear, to listen, and to be changed with the perspective of the others. So one important project I think is very useful at this moment is United Nations Alliance of Civilizations project, which incorporates the themes such as youth, solidarity, media literacy, immigration issues, intercultural innovation, use of technology in the process of dialogue. So right now we are living in a society, in a digital age, and we can use digital diplomacy to increase the space of dialogue, increase the dialogical space. Or among the youth are very active, they use all these spaces, they travel around the world, but they usually engage with their peers, with the perspective they learn from their elders. So I think along these United Nations, the Alliance of Civilization project, there are some minor projects that can be expanded to increase the number of dialogical spaces. On the other hand, at the level of diplomacy, friends of mediation initiatives, which may bring common sphere among the politicians. And lastly, which is very important, I think, is the peace education. I think the one important way, one preventive approach to create resilient societies is to bring conflict resolution skills, understanding the other at the much earlier stages. I think educating the ideas with regard to peace, creating some kind of universal consciousness is very important. Oftentimes when we deal with the matters of radicalization and extremism, the education, education is considered at the center of these problems. I think we have enough space at the education level, peace education, which may be very important element, not only at the, the lower levels, but at, we can do it even in the universities. So we practiced, we trained peer mediation in my earlier universities, and even the university students can be trained to deal with their own issues. I think, so these peace education, increasing more dialogical spaces and increasing the communication between the people, the dialogical communication between the people at the digital context may be useful and practical elements to deal with the dialectical concerns, dialectical communication that is initiated by leaders at the top level. So I think we have a lot. I mean, if we look at the process, these concerns from the bottom up, we have lots of resources, and we have to, I think, work on more practical experiences to deal with those challenges. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kazi, thank you. I suggest that we take questions after all the panelists have had a chance to speak. And the attention you've been paying, you've been stressing on the grassroots in overcoming conflict, I think will lead us very well to the intervention by our next panelist, which is Dr. Dadi Darmadi. I will introduce him briefly. As I've mentioned, he has arrived from Indonesia, which is a country which is regarded by many as a model for diversity and tolerance. Mr. Darmadi, Dr. Darmadi, is a senior lecturer at the Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University in Jakarta. He's an anthropologist, a lifelong student of Islam, and an expert on religious tolerance. And apart from his academic work and prolific publishing activities, he has been very active in the field, and he has been working on projects to promote tolerance and community empowerment both in Indonesia and in Saudi Arabia. Now his intervention will focus on the role of communities and community leaders in overcoming conflict. Please.
Thank you so much, Anita. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, conference speakers and participants, good afternoon and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic and all the organizers for the invitation. It's truly an honor to be here. Let me begin by showing you some highlights of my talk. And in the next 15 minutes or so, I will focus on the role of traditional and indigenous conflict resolution and its framework from Indonesia. In recent decades, we have witnessed the rise of civil wars, violent extremism, intercultural conflicts like we've never seen before. The 21st century, says Aydin Guliev, began with interfaith, quote unquote, interethnic and intercultural conflicts worldwide. This interesting observation from Aydin Guliev, an Azerbaijani political expert, came after the questions of how urgent it has been for modern states to develop, create, and implement policy facilitating the full manifestation of all the creative power of interethnic and interreligious solidarity. In a pluralistic society like Indonesia, home to more than 260 million Muslims, social interaction does not always run well as expected. In social interaction between members of the society, often occurs intersections causing social conflict. Intercultural conflict, like any other conflict, occurs due to differences in norms, values, and most notably interests between different communities. In the past, Indonesia has witnessed frequent violent intercultural conflicts. Even violent conflicts tend to recur, and the intensity and violence increases. But on a positive note, in each community, there are patterns and versions of how to solve conflict. And in the case of Indonesia, some of them come from their own culture and beliefs. In its development, however, the conflict resolution model originating from the local culture or the local community has rarely been used as a media for conflict resolution. They tend to be ignored, especially after the modern states, through law enforcement officials, taking over resolution almost of all conflicts. As a result, the role of customary, or in our Bahasa Indonesia we call it adat, the customary or adat institutions have declined, and local community participation has been relatively low. Meanwhile, dependence on law enforcement officers has never been high. In this presentation, I'd like to offer theoretical framework that local and traditional indigenous community participation is very much needed as an important condition for overcoming the intercultural conflicts and the creation of peace among the people. In recent years, differences in cultural values, social and political attitudes have increased prejudice against the other. You might not agree with what this slide has to say, but some scholars suggest that this following unfavorable condition in the society, among others, tend to reinforce this prejudice. Number one, when contact situations create competition among different groups. Number two, when contact conditions bring unpleasant, forceful, and intense feelings among the people. Number three, when contact situations lower other people's self-esteem or their social status. And finally, when contact occurs between different ethnic groups that have morals or norms contrary to one another. Some of these attitudes and prejudices can lead to conflict. To resolve conflict, according to one theory, there needs to be a coercion through agreement or consensus on the values and norms that apply in a society. Through the consensus of values and enforced norms, society can be united and controlled so that there is no conflict that leads to destruction. This Dahrendorf conflict resolution model was later adopted to give birth to a litigation or legal resolution model and non-litigation, negotiation, mediation and conciliation, and arbitration and custom institutions. In the meantime, Galtung offered a new way of resolving conflict by dismantling the basic foundation that were the root cause of the conflict. That means cultural factors that are the basic foundation of every violence must be transformed into a culture of peace. In Galtung's view, stopping violent conflict and structural conflict is not realistic if we do not change the basic foundation of the conflict. Why? Because as long as the foundation is still strong, cultural violence, then structural violence and violent conflict will still occur. Experts in the field of conflict resolution show a number of weaknesses in the conflict resolution model that are based solely on national law. Therefore, it is necessary to open the widest possible space for community participation, local and traditional, in the resolution of domestic conflicts by using living customary institutions and derived from cultural values. In Indonesia, that culture of peace in Gantung's concept above can be identified in various forms, including number one, traditional leadership, number two, customary law, number three, religious values, and finally, the philosophy of friendship in the society. A culture of peace that is taken from the traditions, customs, cultural and religious values that live in various communities in Indonesia show that it can potentially be used to legitimize and bring about peaceful solutions to violence and conflict issues. Now, let me show you some examples from Indonesia. In West Kalimantan, for example, in the aftermath of the 2001 ethnic conflict, which killed nearly 400 people and have made about 40,000 people as refugees, the conflict resolution mechanism took quite a while and to make peace recovered in the area. But there was some kind of mechanism was carried out at the initiative of the local community leaders, including the young people and women. Adat or customary forum of communities and deliberations or musyawarah among Malay ethnic groups, for example, was only done to resolve small-scale conflicts such as fights or quarrels that did not result in casualties. For conflicts that cause fatalities, the resolution is submitted directly to the state apparatus, especially the police, using national law. According to community members, including the young and women in West Kalimantan, conflicts can actually be prevented and resolved internally and in natural way, and does not need to involve outside parties, including the police, except for large-scale cases. But recurring conflicts indicate that the resolution made against it sometimes fail. This failure may be caused by the inability to find the root cause of the conflict, or the resolution model used is not suitable for the context. And I hope in this case, Mr. Rudi Sukandar, my fellow from Indonesia, will talk more about this case in West Kalimantan. And now let me give you another example. This time is from Maluku, or the Moluccas, which had witnessed very severe social conflict in the late 1990s, between 1999 and 2002, causing about 5,000 lives lost and about 700,000 people displaced. One form of resolving social conflict was by inserting cultural values that had been inherent since the time of immemorial and become, in our language we call it persaudaraan, which is brotherly or unity bond between the Ambon people and the Maluku people in general. One form of conflict resolution is the local wisdom that is owned by Ambonese people, namely Pela Gandong, which were able to reduce social conflicts. Pela Gandong is a traditional local wisdom rooted in the Moluccas long before the coming of trans-regional and European powers to the islands. Pela Gandong strengthens the unity of the people of different culture, religion, ethnicity, and islands based on blood ties and descendants between family relatives. If there is a conflict, it is these community leaders who take the initiative and proactively resolve it by deliberation and counseling. Deliberation is headed by the head of the village, who is assisted by clerics, ulama, and traditional leaders. Through this consultation, peace was produced between those involved in conflicts. Village heads, religious leaders, and indigenous actors act as mediators for those involved in all conflicts. Therefore, they must be independent or impartial. Deliberation in the form of musyawarah is encouraged and inspired by the teachings of Islam, which principally prioritize peace and forgives each other. However, if peace cannot be reached, then the resolution of the conflict is delegated to the police force by using national law. And by saying this statement, this brings me to my concluding remark. Number one, for each settlement of intercultural conflict, it does not have to always depend on institutions, modern institution, and national law enforcement officials. it is necessary to seriously open up space and involve the participation of local people in the process of resolving the conflict. I really appreciate my previous speaker, Mr. Talha, who also mentioned about the same idea, and also the same case in Lebanon, I guess, in the previous session. Number two, in its implementation, this is not always easy, of course, especially if it is examined from cross-cultural communication, because each party with a different cultural background certainly has its own frame in responding and solving a problem. In this context, number three, cross-cultural communication in the form of deliberation and counseling, for example, like musyawarah, in the two cases from Kalimantan and the Moluccas in Indonesia, can be a good example and perhaps alternatives in overcoming and resolving intercultural conflicts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Termadi. Our third speaker, Professor Masood Akhtar Hazarvi, hailed from Pakistan, but he has now been living in the UK for over 18 years. He's a director and imam at the Al-Hira Educational and Cultural Centre in Luton, which is north of London. And for 9 years, he was an imam at Luton Central Mosque. And prior to arriving in the UK, he enjoyed a successful academic career in Pakistan. He's known for his expertise in Muslim Oriental law and Islamic studies. He holds degrees in Arabic and Islamic culture from Medina in Saudi Arabia. His qualifications also include an IT degree from the UK, as I've learned. As an Islamic scholar, he will speak about a general Islamic perspective about resolving conflicts and tackling conflicting issues. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Czech Republic, and OIC Prague branch for organizing and hosting such a tremendous and important conference. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to be here and share my thoughts with you on dispute resolution and conflict mediation from an Islamic perspective. As we have seen, and all of us know, that currently humanity is besieged with all sorts of conflicts. But instead of dealing with conflicts through peaceful means such as dialogue and cultural understanding, often being dealt to settle or resolve these conflicts through force. The governments are using the might is right concept to settle such conflicts, but the history tells us that this concept, where the mighty turn to force and impose their will on the weak, does not work. This approach may apply to God's other creations. However, it does not work for human beings, as we are given a moral sense which overshadows all our behaviors. This is moral dilemma requires tackling the underlying problems, and unless tackled properly, the conflict will still persist. It does not go away. This moral sense is very strong in Islam. Islam means peace in all its forms and asks for justice in resolving all conflicts so that the aggrieved party is satisfied with the outcome and there is peace for all. In Islam, the prime approach to conflict resolution is based on religious values, traditional rituals of reconciliation, and principle of coexistence. Dear brothers and sisters, Islam advocates living in peace as well as seeking peace within our own selves and living in peace with other human beings, our surroundings and environment. This was the message of Noah, Abraham, Ishaq, Ishmael, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be upon them. All conflicts, whether they are personal or within the family and community, or on a national or international level, disturb the relationship of peace. The Islamic principles of peace building, clearly mentioned in the Quran, also affirm that all human beings have a common origin. Quranic word nafsim wahida. In fact, the basic concept is enshrined in the very first word that Muslims hear when they are born or say on accepting Islam, commonly known as ash-shahada. Along with this, Islam confers dignity and respect on a human simply by virtue of being a human. The Quran says, we have conferred dignity on the progeny of Adam. This dignity is bestowed by God on all humans regardless of their ethnicity, religion, tribe, or nationality. Islam celebrates great diversity within human beings. We come from different backgrounds and traditions. This richness is a gift from our Creator. It is very much apparent within the worldwide Islamic community, as you can see at this conference today. The essential lesson from Islam is to have friendly dialogue, collaborate, and cooperate, and develop a real healthy understanding of one another. This is the first essential step for living in peace and resolving all conflicts encountered in today's complicated world. There are great many similarities between Islam and Western systems for settling disputes and building peace nationally and internationally, such as communicating with each other, negotiating, compromising, and solving our differences peacefully. However, the West is pursuing the peace objective often ignores the contributions of Muslim scholars and practitioners in addressing various international issues. Instead, efforts are directed at altering, modifying, and reforming the Islamic societies toward its specific values and agenda. Thus, as a dominant world power, the West, including the United States, in its conflicts often imposes peace through force, and in simple words, bullying, power politics, while the underlying causes of conflict remain unresolved. Such is the case now, for example, with regard to the conflicts within several Arab countries. As I have said earlier, the Islamic principles are meant to maintain peaceful, healthy, and meaningful relationship with God and with all the humanity. This relationship is disrupted by conflicts, whether personal, communal, national, or international. Its peaceful restoration is essential for the sake of fairness and justice. Peace-building efforts work towards preventing an escalation of conflict and establishing a long-lasting and self-sustaining solution. Peace is intimately tied with justice in its Islamic understanding. You cannot achieve one without the other. Legitimate grievances of the affected party must be addressed if real and essential peace is to be achieved. Here are some relevant verses from the Quran addressed to Islamic community. O you who believe, be upright to God, witnessing with justice, and let not the hatred of certain people prevent you from acting justly. Adhere to justice, for that is nearer to piety, and fear God. God is informed of what you do. In chapter An-Nisa, verse number 135, Quran says, O you who believe, stand firmly for justice as witness to God, even if against yourselves or your parents or your relatives. Whether one is rich or poor, God takes care of both. So do not follow your desires, lest you deviate. If you deviate or turn away, then God is aware of what you do. Towards this end, Islamic scholars also emphasize promoting Islamic ethics in order to prevent, mediate, and resolve various conflicts. This must take place along with a personal transformation, developing spiritual awareness through dhikr, constant remembrance of God as in grace, praying, fasting, and as well as through acts of charity and love for other human beings. One should exercise compassion and forgive others who have done him or her harm, and move away from greed and materialism, selfishness, self-centered views, and harming others, and work to live peacefully in cooperation with each other. The Quran constantly uses the word sulh in resolving all types of conflicts. It means seeking peace, reconciliation, compromise, and settlement. As such, during the early Islamic history, Muslim jurists developed a number of legal structures and institutions using a variety of techniques to resolve conflicts amicably and achieve peace. Throughout the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's life, there are numerous stories which reflect his interest in settling dispute in a polite, friendly manner. One example I would like to share with you today is in the reconstruction of Kaaba, a serious quarrel arose over the setting of Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone. Each one of the four leaders of the Quraysh was eager to have this honor and ensure he was not outdone by the others. Their disagreement led to an impasse. However, to resolve this matter, one of the leaders suggested that the first person to arrive at the Haram in the next morning could be the one to place the Hajar al-Aswad at its place. As it transpired, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the first to arrive at the Haram. Not wishing to have the privilege all to himself, he asked each of the contesting tribes to select one leader. He then spread a sheet of cloth and put the Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone, on it. Asked the leaders to hold it at four ends and together raise it. As a result, A serious conflict was averted by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's wise and far-sighted action in giving all four leaders an equal honor of placing the stone. I end here today by saying, may God protect all of us and guide all of us to the good for each other. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for this. Our last speaker here, Dr. Afzal Chowdhury from the UK, is a British Pakistani. He has had the grace to accept that his intervention can take no longer than 5 minutes. So without much further ado.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Hi, Sat Sri Akal to everyone. Thank you very much to International Relations of Prague and OIC countries and all organizers. And special thanks to Pakistani Ambassador Dr. Israr Ahmad, who is deputed here and sitting in front of me. And he invited me, and I joined all of you great people here. Basically, we are here today to say something about overcoming intercultural conflicts. According to my understanding, according to my research, all religions of the world came from culture, but none of culture came from religion. If you see on history, as an impartial person, 8,500 years ago, there was Mesopotamian civilizations. All divine religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all came from that civilization. Prophet Noah, Prophet Abraham, Prophet Moses, Isa, Zachariah, Elijah, Muhammad, peace be upon him, all came from Mesopotamia. And on the other hand, all religions which are famous in India, China, Thailand, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, they took their basic source from Hinduism. And the Indus Valley is the second oldest civilization of the world, 6,500 years ago. So all other religions, they came from Indus Valley. Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism, Confucianism, Shintoism, they took their basic source from Hinduism. So Hinduism came from Indus Valley. So religion and culture, never we can separate religion and culture. And according to my understanding, that religious conflicts are minor, but cultural conflicts are so strong. If you see people who are living in South Asia, they spent all their life according to Indus Valley civilization. If you look at Western world, people spent their life according to Western civilization. So cultural conflicts are more stronger than religious conflicts. On the other hand, we are talking about the resolution of conflicts because I have some short time today. I got short time today. So the resolution of conflict, we can resolve the conflict, but mediator should be impartial. If mediator should be partial or biased by religion or biased by culture, then we can't resolve these conflicts. Thank you very much. That's all from my side due to shortage of time. Thank you very much again. That's all of my side.
Thank you very much to all four speakers. I'm sure you will now have time to expand in answering questions. We only have time for one or two, so I'll open the floor to possible questions. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm the Turkish ambassador in Prague. It's not a question, but a small, short remark. As we talk about the long-term possibilities of conflict resolution and transforming conflicts through mediation, I would like to make a few remarks on the Mediation for Peace initiative launched by Turkey with Finland in September 2010 in New York. This initiative was launched under the auspices of the United Nations with a view to enhance the prominence of mediation in preventive diplomacy and conflict resolution and to stimulate additional resources for mediation efforts. It also aims at enhancing the preventive diplomacy and mediation capacities of the UN, regional organizations and individual countries. To date, the group has promoted 4 UN General Assembly resolutions on supporting mediation for the peaceful settlement of disputes, conflict prevention and resolution. In recent years, the Mediation for Peace initiative has gathered significant interest. The country members of the group has reached 249, 8 major regional and international organizations, including the UN, European Union, OSCE and OIC, are also members of the group. The group of Friends of Mediation meets at the level of foreign ministers once a year. To date, 8 ministerial meetings have been held. Recognizing the need for harnessing the growing interest on mediation, Turkey has also hosted 4 Istanbul conferences on mediation with wide international participation since 2012. The 5th Istanbul conference, the forthcoming one, on mediation will be held on 13th of November this year under the patronage of the Turkish Foreign Minister, His Excellency Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu. This conference will explore how sustainable development, gender or youth inclusivity, and digital transformation can enhance the practice of mediation towards lasting, peaceful solutions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this, and congratulations on a very successful initiative. Any questions for our panelists from the floor? I could hear, that was you? No. Okay, I will then ask one question, and I'm very sorry we don't have time for questions for each of our panelists, but maybe I will ask Professor Masood about something that struck me in his speech, and that was, well, basically comparison between Islamic approach and Western approach to conflict resolution, and the mention of bullying from the West. Now, whenever there's conflict resolution, there's always a need for compromise between the sides, and it's very hard to draw the line between compromise and bullying. Now, do you think you could expand and comment on that a little bit?
As I have explained in my speech, that Islamic point of view about resolving the conflicts and tackling the disputed issues, that is compromising and talking and conversation, dialogue to each other. And using the force for tackling the issue, this is not the permanent solution of reaching to the roots of the issues. And each of the parties, they should compromise in dialogue. And I think this is the single way that we can reach to the origin of the issues, and then with mutual understanding, we can resolve as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Would any of the panelists like to make closing remarks?
I'd like to thank two reflections on professors. I think they also complimented, and especially for your comments on the Indonesia. Thank you.
Just very briefly, I think this conference has given us opportunities to actually listen and observe. There are so many potentials that we have, including in the Muslim world, to offer for the conflict resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please enjoy your coffee break. Thank you.